Contract marriage deal with the Mafia boys. Ilera Rossi. Your father made promises he couldn't keep. I forced my spine straight. My father is dead. The words came out steadier than I felt. Dante's gaze didn't waver. His debt is not, and debts belong to the bloodline. He steepled his fingers, eyes sharp enough to strip me down to every secret I'd ever tried to hide. A low, melodic laugh broke the silence. Marco rose from where he lounged, the sound somehow more dangerous than Dante's stillness. Don't be so grim, brother. Can't you see she's terrified? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Though fear does interesting things to people. Sometimes it makes them foolish. Sometimes, he stopped a breath away, the scent of whiskey and danger curling between us. Sometimes it makes them honest. And which am I? Asked before I could stop myself. Marco's grin deepened. We're about to find out. Dante's voice cut through the tension, low and final. By the end of tonight, Ilera, you'll choose how you repay us. Just remember. He glanced at Marco, something unspoken passing between them. Either way, you'll belong to both of us. Before we continue, a big shout out to one of our loyal audience at Bobby Atwood. Thank you for your support, and also if you want a loyal shout out, please do indicate in the comment what the country you're watching us from. Chapter 1. The smell of decay had a permanent home in our apartment. It wasn't the scent of garbage or rot, but the smell of hope dying, a slow, lingering death that seeped into the cracked plaster walls and threadbare carpets. It was the scent of my life. My father, a man who gambled with shadows, had left us with nothing but his debts, a debt that came with a name. The Russo family. They didn't send letters or make polite phone calls. They sent bruised knuckles and broken windows, a constant, low-level hum of terror that had become the soundtrack to my existence. My breaking point wasn't a shattered window, though. It was the quiet, sterile beep of the heart monitor beside my sister's hospital bed. Maya, my brilliant, fierce Maya, was fading. A congenital heart defect, the doctors said. A ticking clock I couldn't afford to rewind. The surgery she needed cost more than the entire building we lived in, a figure so astronomical it felt like a joke. A cruel, cosmic punchline. I had begged. I had pleaded with loan sharks who laughed in my face and charities that offered pamphlets and pity. I sold every last remnant of our mother. A locket, a pair of worn silver earrings. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Rock bottom wasn't a place you fell to. It was a place that rose up to swallow you whole. That was when the car appeared. A black sedan, sleek and silent as a shark slicing through water, parked across from my building. It sat there for 3 days, a silent observer to my desperation. On the 4th day, as I walked home in the rain, the weight of Maya's fading smile crushing my chest, a man stepped out. He was dressed in a suit so sharp it could cut glass and held a black umbrella over his head.
He didn't approach me.
He simply opened the rear door, a silent, imperious summons. I knew what this was. The solution. The final, terrible card left to play. My father's ghost whispered warnings in my ear, but Maya's face was louder. I got in the car. The ride was silent. The city lights smeared against the windows, a watercolor of a life I no longer felt a part of. We drove to a part of the city I had only seen in magazines, where glass towers scraped the bruised twilight sky. The elevator ascended with a nauseating smoothness, opening into a penthouse that was less a home and more a monument to power. It was all cold lines, gleaming chrome, and a view of the city that made everything below look like insignificant toys. And there they were, the Russo brothers. They were nothing alike, a study in contrasts. The one behind the massive obsidian desk was Dante Russo. He was stillness personified, a predator who didn't need to move to assert his dominance. His black suit was tailored to perfection, his dark hair immaculately styled. When his eyes, the color of cold steel, landed on me, I felt pinned, analyzed, and dismissed in a single glance. He was the strategist, the architect of my father's ruin. He was power, cold, and absolute. The other brother, Marco, was lounging on a low leather sofa, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand. He was reckless energy, a barely contained storm. A lock of dark hair fell across his brow, and a lazy, charming smirk played on his lips. His suit was a deep charcoal, but he wore it with a casual disdain, the top button of his shirt undone. When he looked at me, his eyes, a warm and dangerous whiskey brown, held a spark of amusement, of chaos. He was the charmer, the beautiful, broken-edged weapon. Dante spoke first, his voice as cold and hard as the desk he sat behind. "Ilera Rossi, your father was a fool. He made promises he couldn't keep." "My father is dead," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "His death is not," Dante stated, steepling his fingers. His gaze was unnerving, as if he could see every frayed nerve, every ounce of desperation I was trying to hide. Marco laughed, a low, melodic sound that was somehow more threatening than Dante's silence. "Don't be so grim, brother. Can't you see she's terrified? It's a bad look on someone so pretty." He stood, moving with a liquid grace, and stopped a few feet from me. He smelled of whiskey and something wild and masculine. "He's the brains," Marco said, jerking a thumb toward Dante. "I'm the entertainment. We have a proposition," Dante cut in, ignoring his brother completely. He slid a thick folder across the desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. "Your sister requires surgery. We are aware of the cost. We are also aware that you have exhausted all other options." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What do you want?" "A marriage," Dante said, the word dropping into the sterile air like a stone. "A contract. For 1 year, you will be a Russo. You will bear the name, attend the functions, and present a united front. In return, your sister's medical expenses will be covered in their entirety. Your father's debt will be absolved." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. "A marriage? To whom?" Marco's smirk widened. He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "That's the fun part, Principessa. To both of us." I flinched back as if burned. The idea was archaic, barbaric. "That's insane." "It's a solution," Dante corrected me, his voice devoid of emotion. "Our enemies are circling. A united front, a new alliance solidified by marriage, presents a unique complication for them. A wife tied to both the head and the enforcer of the Russo family is untouchable. It buys us time. It buys your sister's life." I looked from Dante's chillingly logical face to Marco's recklessly charming one. The cold strategist and the reckless charmer. Ice and fire. I was being asked to chain myself to both. It wasn't a marriage. It was a sentence. "You'll live at the estate. You will want for nothing. You will be protected," Dante continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The contract outlines all expectations and restrictions. There is no clause for intimacy. This is a business arrangement." Marco winked. "Unless you want it to be." Dante shot his brother a look that could freeze fire. "Sign the contract, Ilera. Your sister's surgery is scheduled for Tuesday. The payment will be transferred the moment your signature is on that paper." He was giving me no choice. This was a carefully constructed trap, and I had walked right into it. The image of Maya, pale and weak in that hospital bed, flashed in my mind. Her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the future she might not have. I would walk through hell for her. This, I supposed, was the entrance. My hand trembled as I stepped forward and picked up the pen. The paper was heavy, the ink a stark, unforgiving black. Dante's cold eyes watched my every move. Marco's charming smile held a glint of something possessive. I was no longer a person. I was a commodity, a piece on their board. With a deep, shuddering breath, I signed my name. I sold my life, my body, my future. The pen scratched against the paper, the sound echoing in the silent room like the closing of a tomb. The deal was done.
Chapter 2.
The Russo estate was not a home. It was a kingdom carved out of stone and shadow, hidden from the world by a forest of ancient, silent trees. As the car crunched up the long gravel driveway, the mansion loomed into view, a Gothic masterpiece of dark stone, sharp angles, and windows that glittered like suspicious eyes. Opulence dripped from every turret and gargoyle, but it was a cold, lonely kind of wealth, the kind that was meant to intimidate, not welcome. I stepped out of the car, my cheap coat feeling flimsy and inadequate in the face of such grandeur. The air was different here, cleaner, sharper, but heavy with the scent of pine and secrets. The massive front doors swung open on their own, revealing a man who could only be the majordomo. He was tall and severe, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Miss Rossi," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "I am Alistair. Welcome to the estate. If you will follow me." He led me into a grand foyer that swallowed sound. My footsteps were silent on the black and white marble floor. A cavernous ceiling soared above us, from which a crystal chandelier hung like a frozen waterfall. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women with haunted eyes, the Russo ancestors, their cold judgment following me as I passed. This wasn't a house, it was a mausoleum with better lighting. Alistair led me up a sweeping staircase and down a long, carpeted hallway. "This will be your wing. Mr. Dante and Mr. Marco's quarters are in the east and west wings, respectively. You are not to enter their private spaces unless expressly invited." He opened a set of double doors, and I gasped. The room was larger than my entire apartment. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center, draped in silks the color of champagne. A white marble fireplace stood cold and empty on one wall, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning, terrifying view of the sprawling, manicured gardens below. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cage. A gilded, impossibly luxurious cage. "Your belongings have been replaced," Alistair said, gesturing to a walk-in closet with the door ajar, revealing rows of designer clothing. "A stylist will be available for any public appearances. Your schedule will be provided to you each morning. You will dine with Mr. Dante and Mr. Marco at 8 o'clock this evening in the formal dining room." He handed me a slim, black phone. "This is for your use. It is secure. Your sister's hospital has been contacted. The funds have been transferred." And with that, he was gone, the doors closing behind him with a soft, final click. I stood in the center of the room, feeling small and utterly lost. I walked over to the window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. The grounds were a fortress. High stone walls enclosed the entire property, and I could see figures moving with purpose along the perimeter. Guards. This place wasn't just opulent, it was dangerous. That evening, I dressed in a simple black dress I found in the closet, the fabric feeling alien against my skin. I followed the maze of hallways to the dining room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The room was imposing, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that could seat 30. Dante and Marco were already there, seated at opposite ends, the vast distance between them crackling with unspoken tension. Dante was in a crisp white shirt, his focus on a tablet in front of him. Marco was leaning back in his chair, a glass of red wine in his hand, watching me approach with that unsettling, predatory amusement. "The lady of the manor arrives," Marco drawled, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Doesn't she look lovely, brother? A bit like a scared little bird, but lovely nonetheless." Dante didn't look up from his tablet. "Sit, Elara." His voice was a command, not an invitation. I took a seat in the middle of the table, feeling trapped in the space between them. Servants moved silently, placing plates of food in front of us that smelled divine but looked like ashes to me. Dante finally set his tablet aside, his steel-gray eyes fixing on me. "Now that you are here, we will establish the rules. Alistair has given you the basics. I will provide the specifics. You will be a reflection of this family. You will be poised, respectful, and, above all, discreet. You will not speak of your past. You will not speak of this arrangement. To the world, you are a beloved wife. Is that clear?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "When you are with me," Dante continued, his tone clinical, "you will defer to my judgment. You will not speak unless spoken to at public functions. Your opinions on business are neither required nor desired. You are an asset, an image. Act like one." My hands clenched into fists in my lap. An asset. An image. Marco let out a theatrical sigh.
So serious, Dante.
You'll frighten her away before we've even had a chance to play. He leaned forward, his charming smile doing nothing to warm his eyes. My rules are simpler, Principessa. When you're with me, try to have a little fun.
Smile. Laugh.
Let them see a woman who's happy. A man is only as powerful as the happiness of the woman on his arm. He took a slow sip of his wine. But remember, it's all a game. And I always play to win. The rivalry between them was a palpable thing, a third presence at the table. Dante's control versus Marco's chaos. Strategy versus impulse. It was clear they were not just brothers but competitors, and I was now the prize, or perhaps the weapon, in their private war. The rest of the meal passed in a tense, suffocating silence. I barely touched my food. When it was over, Dante stood, folding his napkin with precise, deliberate movements. Alistair will show you to the library. There are books there you may find educational. On our family history. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Do not disappoint us, Alara. He turned and left without another word. I was about to stand, desperate to escape Marco's unnerving stare, when he spoke again, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that slid down my spine like ice. He'll try to own you, Marco said, his gaze intense. He thinks everything is a chess piece, you included. He'll try to put you in a box, make you predictable, controllable. He rose from his chair and walked slowly around the table until he was standing behind me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, and I froze, my breath catching in my chest. He leaned down, his lips close to my ear, his scent, whiskey and danger, enveloping me. But you're not a pawn, are you, little bird? He whispered, his voice a silken threat. There's a fire in you. I saw it the second you walked into that office. His fingers brushed against the nape of my neck, a touch so light it was almost imaginary, yet it sent a jolt of pure electricity through me. He straightened up, and I finally dared to breathe. I turned my head to look at him, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. His charming smile was gone, replaced by something much darker, much more serious. Be careful in this house, Alara, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Dante isn't the only monster who lives here. With a final, lingering look, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the vast, empty dining room. His warning hung in the air, a chilling promise of the dangers that lay ahead. I had been so focused on the threat of the cold, calculating brother that I hadn't fully considered the peril posed by the reckless, charming one. And as I sat there, trembling, I realized this contract wasn't just about surviving the Russo family's world. It was about surviving the Russo brothers themselves. Chapter 3. The first public test came 3 nights later. It was a charity gala held in a downtown museum, the kind of event where wealth and power bled into one another under the polite guise of philanthropy. The dress laid out for me was a slash of midnight blue silk that clung to every curve. The diamonds at my throat felt like a glittering leash. Staring at my reflection, I saw a stranger, a carefully crafted illusion of elegance and ease. Underneath it, my nerves were screaming. I descended the grand staircase to find them waiting. Dante, a statue in a flawless black tuxedo, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. Marco, leaning against the doorframe, a vision of dark charm, his eyes raking over me with an appreciative gleam that was both flattering and deeply unsettling. A silent, tense moment passed as they both took me in. I was their creation tonight, their showpiece. Acceptable, Dante pronounced, his voice clipped. More than acceptable, brother, Marco countered, pushing off the wall. He offered me his arm, a roguish glint in his eye. Shall we, Mrs. Russo? He said the name with a pointed emphasis, a reminder of our shared bond. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as I hesitated, then took Marco's arm. We walked to the limousine, Dante a half-step behind, a silent, brooding shadow. In the car, the tension was a physical entity. Dante stared out the window, all rigid control, while Marco hummed along to the low music, his thigh brushing against mine, a casual touch that felt anything but. The museum was a sea of influential faces, polite smiles, and assessing glances. The moment we entered, a hush fell. We were a spectacle, the infamous Russo brothers and their mysterious new wife. My hand tightened on Marco's arm, and he covered it with his own, his thumb stroking my skin in a gesture that could have been comforting if it wasn't so possessive. "Smile, cara mia," he murmured, "for my ears only. You're on stage." Dante moved to my other side, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. I was flanked, claimed, a treasure being displayed by its owners. The feeling was suffocating. "Senator Albright," Dante said, his voice smooth as he greeted a portly man with a practiced smile. "A pleasure to see you. May I introduce my wife, Elara?" I forced a smile, murmuring a polite greeting as the senator's eyes darted between the three of us, a flicker of confusion and intrigue in his gaze. This was their strategy: to confuse, to unsettle, to present a dynamic no one could easily parse. A wife married to both brothers? It was a power play of the highest order, and I was the living, breathing embodiment of it. For the next hour, I was passed between them like a baton. One moment, I was laughing at one of Marco's outrageous, charming stories, feeling the warmth of his body as he drew me close. The next, I was standing beside Dante, a silent, elegant partner, as he discussed stock portfolios and political maneuvers in low, serious tones. The contrast was dizzying. With Marco, I felt a dangerous, thrilling spark, a pull toward his reckless heat. With Dante, there was a strange sense of stability, of being next to an immovable object. He was cold, yes, but there was a certainty to him that was almost reassuring in its own way. And in unguarded moments, I caught glimpses of something more in each of them. I saw it in Marco when a woman from his past approached, her eyes full of a sad, familiar longing. For a fleeting second, the charming mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of genuine pain, a deep-seated loneliness he papered over with bravado. He dismissed her quickly, his smile returning, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I saw it in Dante later, as we stood near a balcony overlooking the city. He was watching the crowd, his expression closed off, but his gaze kept snagging on a family, a mother, a father, a small child laughing. A shadow of something, regret, yearning, crossed his features before he walled it off again, becoming the unfeeling strategist once more. These were not simple monsters. They were complicated, broken men, and that realization was more dangerous than any simple fear. The tension between them, however, was never far from the surface. It was in the way Dante's hand would tighten on my back when Marco made me laugh too loud. It was in the challenging glint in Marco's eyes when he'd cut in while Dante was speaking to a business associate, effortlessly stealing the attention. They were a perfectly balanced scale of rivalry, and I was the fulcrum. As the evening began to wind down, I excused myself, needing a moment of quiet. The constant performance was exhausting. I found a deserted corridor behind an exhibit on ancient pottery, the air still and cool. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, just breathing. "You play the part well." The voice was unfamiliar, laced with a venomous sweetness. I opened my eyes. A man was standing at the end of the hall, half hidden in the shadows. He was older, impeccably dressed, but his smile was thin and cruel. His eyes were like chips of ice. "I'm sorry," I said, my guard instantly up. "The doting wife," he sneered, stepping into the light. I recognized him from news clippings my father used to obsess over. Lorenzo Gallo, the head of the rival Gallo family, the man the Russos were trying to intimidate. It's a good performance, but I wonder how long it will last. I stood up straighter, refusing to show fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I think you do. A contract, wasn't it? To save that pathetic sister of yours." Ice flooded my veins. How did he know? "The Russos think they are clever," Gallo continued, taking another step closer. "Using a pretty little thing like you as a shield. But shields can be broken. Alliances can be shattered. He was just a few feet away now, his cologne cloying and heavy. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, his eyes glinting with malice. They made a mistake bringing you into this, girl. A fatal one. You have a weakness they don't understand, a history they don't know, and a secret that will burn their entire kingdom to the ground. He smiled again, a predator savoring the kill. Be careful which monster's bed you sleep in. Sometimes, the one who buys you isn't the one who owns you. He turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving his words hanging in the air like poison. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. A secret that will burn their kingdom to the ground? What did he mean? I stumbled back toward the gala, my composure shattered. I saw Dante and Marco across the room, watching the crowd, watching for threats. But the most dangerous threat wasn't out there. It was here, inside with me. A whispered threat from an enemy, carrying the weight of a past I didn't understand, and a secret I didn't even know I possessed. Gallo's words were a promise, and I was standing right in the blast radius. Chapter 4. The gala had cracked something open. The unspoken truce in the house, the polite distance maintained by invisible walls, shattered. The days that followed were a series of private confrontations, of boundaries being tested until they frayed. The contract was a set of rules on paper, but in the charged air of the estate, it felt more like a list of challenges. Dante's style of control was methodical, a slow and steady erosion of my will. He would summon me to his study, a room of dark wood, leather, and the scent of old paper and power. He never raised his voice, never threatened. He simply expected. "We will be hosting the O'Connells next week," he said one afternoon, not looking up from a ledger. "Irish associates. They value family above all. You will be seated beside me. You will talk about your feigned desire to redecorate the East Wing and your passion for classic literature. Do you understand? You want me to lie?" He finally lifted his gaze, his steel eyes pinning me. "I want you to perform the duties for which you are being compensated. The truth is irrelevant. The outcome is all that matters." He pushed a thin book across the desk. "The Russo family history. I expect you to have it memorized by Friday. There will be a test." It wasn't a request. I wanted to throw the book at his head, to scream that I was a person, not an employee to be managed. But the thought of Maya, safe and healing because of this man, was a gag in my mouth. I took the book without a word. His control was in the details, in stripping away my identity piece by piece and replacing it with one of his own design. Marco's approach was the opposite. He didn't try to manage me, he tried to unravel me. He was a force of charming chaos, appearing when I least expected it, always pushing, prodding, seeking a reaction. He found me in the garden, where I'd escaped for a moment of peace. "Hiding from the big bad wolf?" he asked, dropping onto the stone bench beside me. "Far too close." "One of them, at least." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that was dangerously appealing. "He's turning you into a porcelain doll, you know. Polished and perfect and lifeless." He plucked a rose from a nearby bush, twirling it between his fingers. "I prefer things with thorns." He offered it to me. "Tell me something real, Elara. What did you want to be before all this?" The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in years. "A teacher," I whispered, the admission feeling like a betrayal to the hardened woman I was trying to become. "A teacher," he repeated softly, his gaze intense. "You would have been a good one." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "It's not too late."
A year.
That's all this is. Dante sees this contract as a leash. I see it as an opportunity to see what you're really made of. His fingers brushed against mine as I took the rose. The spark was there again, hot and immediate. It was a terrifying, addictive sensation. I felt myself drawn to him, to the life and wildness in him that stood in such stark contrast to Dante's cold world. It felt like a choice between drowning in ice or being consumed by fire. The attraction was a confusing, chaotic thing. I found myself watching Dante when he was unaware, admiring the sharp, intelligent lines of his face as he worked, feeling a reluctant respect for the sheer force of his will. There was a security in his power, a strange comfort in his unyielding presence. Then Marco would walk into a room, and all that calculated admiration would dissolve into a dizzying, visceral pull. His easy laughter, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the hint of pain he couldn't quite hide, it all called to a reckless part of me I thought had died. I was living in a state of constant whiplash, torn between two powerful, opposing forces. The tension in the house grew thick enough to choke on. Meals were silent battlegrounds. Hallways were territories to be navigated with care. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I was in the library, trying to force Russo family lineage into my brain, when the quiet of the estate was ripped apart by the sound of shattering glass, followed by a series of sharp, percussive cracks. Gunshots. My blood ran cold. I dropped the book and flattened myself on the floor behind a heavy desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. Shouts echoed from the foyer, guttural and violent. The sounds of a fight, of bodies hitting the floor. The estate was under attack. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The house fell silent again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, listening silence of the aftermath. I stayed hidden, every muscle tensed, straining to hear. Footsteps approached the library, slow and heavy. I held my breath, praying it was one of the brothers, one of our guards. The door creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the hallway light. I couldn't see his face, but he was large, dressed in black, and holding a gun. He wasn't one of ours. My mind screamed. This was it. Gallo's threat made real. He took a step into the room, his weapons sweeping the shadows. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. Then another sound, a soft thud from behind the intruder, followed by a choked gasp. I opened my eyes to see the man crumple to the floor. And standing over him, his chest heaving, a bloody knife in one hand and his own gun in the other, was Dante. His eyes, wild and feral, found mine in the darkness. There was no cold strategist here now. This was a killer, raw and primal. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me to my feet, his grip like iron on my arm. "Are you hurt?" His voice was a low growl. I shook my head, unable to speak. His gaze swept over me, ensuring I was telling the truth. Then he was pulling me from the room, his body a shield in front of mine. The foyer was a scene of controlled carnage. 2 of Gallo's men lay dead. Marco was there, a cut bleeding freely on his forehead, his face a mask of cold fury as he directed the guards. "Secure the perimeter. I want a full sweep, grounds and house." Marco's voice was pure command, the charming rogue stripped away to reveal the ruthless enforcer beneath. Dante didn't stop. He pulled me up the stairs and into his wing, into his bedroom, a space I was forbidden to enter. It was as minimalist and controlled as he was, all gray and black and steel. He kicked the door shut and pushed me behind him, standing guard, listening. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving me shaky and cold. We were trapped in a room, the silence punctuated only by our harsh breathing. The attack, the violence, the sheer terror of the last few minutes crashed down on me. But there was something else, too. Dante, who had treated me like a possession, an asset, had just saved my life. He had stood between me and a gunman without hesitation. He finally turned from the door, his wild eyes calming slightly as they landed on me. He took a step closer, and I saw something in his expression I had never seen before, a raw, unguarded vulnerability. He looked at me not as a contract, but as a person who had almost been taken from him. And in that moment, trapped in the aftermath of a violent attack, I felt a dangerous, undeniable shift. Fear was mingling with a strange, terrifying form of gratitude, and the cold, calculated man in front of me suddenly seemed like the only safe place in the world. The line between protector and captor blurred, and I knew, with a certainty that stole my breath, that nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 5. The aftermath of the attack draped the estate in a shroud of tense, watchful silence. The broken glass was swept away, the bodies removed, but the memory of the violence lingered like a phantom limb. My world, which had already been precariously balanced, had now shrunk to the confines of Dante's wing. "You'll stay here until we identify and eliminate the threat," he had stated, not asked. "The library is compromised. Your wing is too isolated. Here, you are safe." Safety. The word was a bitter irony. I was now a prisoner in the bedroom of the man who had bought me. Forced proximity had a way of magnifying everything. The scent of his clean, sharp cologne on the air, the sound of his movements in the adjoining bathroom, the sheer, intimidating presence of him in a space that was suddenly shared. Sleep was a skittish creature, and I spent the first night sitting in a plush armchair, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the shadows dance on the walls, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing from the massive bed. He didn't press me. He maintained a careful, calculated distance, sleeping on his side of the bed, leaving the other half of vast, empty territory. But the space between us thrummed with an unspoken energy. It was a strange, suffocating intimacy, born from violence. During the day, he worked from the desk in his room, a silent, focused machine of vengeance. His phone calls were clipped and brutal. "Find him. I don't care what it takes. I want Gallows' head." The cold strategist was in his element, orchestrating a war from the quiet of his sanctuary. I watched him, unable to look away. I saw the way his jaw clenched, the subtle tightening of the muscles in his back. This wasn't just business. The attack had been a violation, a direct challenge to his control, and he was taking it personally. On the second day, Marco appeared at the door. 2 guards stood behind him, a testament to the new level of security. His face was a thundercloud, the cut on his forehead now a stark, angry line. "This is ridiculous, Dante," he snapped, his eyes finding me in the chair. "You can't keep her locked in here like she's Rapunzel." "I can, and I will," Dante replied without looking up from his laptop. She was the target. We were all the target. Marco shot back, stepping into the room. "Keeping her isolated with you only makes her more of one. It's a power play, and Gallo knows it." He turned his gaze on me, his voice softening slightly. "Are you all right, Alara?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice quiet. The concern in his eyes felt genuine, a stark contrast to Dante's cold, possessive protection. He saw me as a person who had been terrified. Dante saw me as a possession that had almost been stolen. "The attack was too clean," Marco said, turning back to Dante. "They knew the patrol routes. They knew where to strike. The breach wasn't from the outside. It was from the inside." Dante finally looked up, his steel eyes meeting his brother's. "I am aware."
A mole.
The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Someone on the inside had betrayed them. Someone who walked these halls, ate in the dining room, someone I had likely seen. The fortress had been breached from within, and now no one was safe, and everyone was a suspect. The guards, the staff, Alistair, anyone. That night, the tension became unbearable. A storm raged outside, mirroring the one inside me. The power flickered and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning. I gasped, a knot of fear tightening in my chest. In the darkness, I felt a shift, and then Dante's voice came from right beside me, low and steady. "It's just the generator switchover. It will be back in a moment." His proximity was overwhelming. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the faint, clean scent of his skin. I was hyper-aware of him in a way that was both terrifying and electrifying. I'm not scared of the dark," I stammered, feeling foolish. "I know," he said, his voice closer still. I realized he was crouching beside my chair. In the next flash of lightning, his face was illuminated, his expression unreadable, intense. "You're scared of the things that hide in it." The power surged back on, flooding the room with soft light. He was still there, closer than he had ever been. His hand came up, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to touch me. Instead, he reached past me and picked up a small, silver picture frame from the side table, one I hadn't noticed before. It had been knocked over when the lights went out. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb brushing over the glass. His entire posture had changed. The iron control had slipped, revealing a deep, profound sadness. Curiosity overriding my fear, I leaned forward slightly. The photograph was of a woman with laughing eyes and a brilliant smile. She was beautiful. Beside her stood a younger Dante, his arm around her, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face that was so different from the man he was now that he looked like a stranger. "Who was she?" I whispered. His jaw tightened, and he placed the frame back on the table, his mask of control sliding back into place. "No one that concerns you." He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the storm. But the brief, heart-wrenching glimpse of the man he used to be, the pain he so clearly carried, had changed something. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man who had become one. Later, as I lay in the vast emptiness of my side of the bed, I couldn't sleep. His words about the mole echoed in my mind.
An inside job.
I thought back to the gala, to Gallo's whispered threat. "You have a weakness they don't understand, a history they don't know." A cold dread crept over me. What if the weakness wasn't just me, but something about my family? My father had been a gambler, a man who moved in shadowed circles. What if he had left behind more than just debt? What if he'd left behind an enemy who is now inside these walls? Driven by a sudden, desperate need, I slipped out of bed. Dante was asleep, his breathing deep and even. I crept to the closet, to the small handbag that held the few personal items I'd brought with me. Inside was a worn leather wallet that had been my father's. It was all I had left of him. I never looked through it. The memories were too painful. But now I needed to know. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Old receipts, a faded picture of my mother, and a folded piece of paper tucked into a hidden sleeve. I had never seen it before. I unfolded it carefully under the dim light from the hallway. It was a business card. On one side, a name, Alistair Finch. On the other, a handwritten note in my father's familiar scrawl. "Finch knows where the bodies are buried. Trust him. He owes me." I stared at the card, my blood turning to ice. Alistair, the majordomo, the man who ran this entire estate with quiet, severe efficiency. The man who had welcomed me into this cage. He was connected to my father. He owed him. Was he the mole? Was he helping Gallo to repay a debt? Or was he the secret my father had left behind, a hidden ally in the lion's den? A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Dante was standing by the bed, awake, his steel eyes narrowed, fixed on the business card in my hand. He had seen it, the clue, the secret, and in his eyes, I saw the instant shift from protector to interrogator. The fragile trust, born of shared danger, evaporated, replaced by cold, hard suspicion. Chapter 6. The business card felt like a burning coal in my hand. Dante's gaze was sharp enough to strip skin, his eyes narrowed on the name written in my father's hand, Alistair. The air in the room crackled, the brief, fragile truce between us incinerated by a single, damning piece of paper. "What is that?" Dante's voice was low, devoid of all the vulnerable warmth I'd imagined just moments before. The predator was back. "It was my father's," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I held it out to him, a peace offering and an admission of guilt all in one. There was no hiding it now. He took the card, his fingers brushing mine. The contact was electric, a jolt of ice and fire. He stared at the name, then at the note on the back. A muscle worked in his jaw. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. I felt like a traitor, even though I didn't know what I was betraying. "Alistair," he said, the name a blade of ice. He looked at me, and his eyes were cold, shuttered fortresses. "When were you planning on mentioning this?" "I just found it. I didn't know." "You didn't know," he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "My estate is attacked. I place you under my personal protection. And you are holding a secret correspondence between your father and my most trusted employee. Forgive me if I find the timing convenient." The accusation stung, sharp and unfair. "I am not the mole, Dante." Then what are you? He shot back, stepping closer. A pawn? A plant? A Trojan horse left behind by a dead man to burn my family from the inside out. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed, a harsh, insistent sound. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening further. Gallo is making a move. He's called a council meeting with the other families. He's trying to consolidate power, using the attack as proof of our weakness. He looked at me, his face a mask of cold calculation. And you will be coming with me.
What?
Why? Because the best way to project strength is to show that our newest, most valuable asset is perfectly safe. Perfectly loyal. His eyes dared me to argue. You will play the part of the devoted wife. You will stand by my side, by our side, and you will smile. And if you make one wrong move, I will not wait for Gallo to burn this family down. I will do it myself, with you in the ashes. The threat was real. The man who had saved me 2 nights ago was gone, replaced by the ruthless mafia lord who saw me as nothing more than a variable in a deadly equation. The council meeting was held in the neutral territory of a high-end, exclusive restaurant, bought out for the night. The air was thick with the smell of expensive food and cheap mistrust. The heads of the city's other families were there, old men with cold eyes and bloody histories. Lorenzo Gallo sat at the head of the table, a smug, reptilian smile on his face. I walked in flanked by Dante and Marco. The sight of us, the 2 brothers and their shared wife, sent a ripple of murmurs through the room. It was exactly the reaction they wanted. We were a united, unbreakable, and utterly bizarre front. I played my part, my hand resting on Dante's arm, my smile plastered on my face, even as Gallo's venomous gaze slid over me. Marco was a coiled spring of violence beside me, his charming facade gone, replaced by the lethal stillness of an enforcer. Dante was pure ice, his authority a palpable force field. They moved as one, a reluctant but powerful unit. During the tense negotiations, I watched them work. Dante's words were scalpels, precise and cutting, dismantling Gallo's arguments. Marco's presence was a hammer, his silent, menacing glare a promise of what would happen if words failed. They hated each other, but when threatened, their loyalty to the Russo name was absolute. I was pouring myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly, when a waiter approached. He was young, nervous, and avoided my eyes. He leaned in, ostensibly to refill my glass, and spoke in a whisper so low I almost missed it. The one who charmed you is the one who harmed you. The car wasn't an accident. He made sure of it. Then he was gone, melting back into the staff. My blood ran cold. The one who charmed you. Marco. The message was clear, a poisoned arrow aimed directly at the chaotic, magnetic brother who had warned me about monsters in this house. Was he the monster he was warning me about? Was his charm a mask for the ultimate betrayal? My mind reeled, trying to process the accusation. Marco, responsible for my family's tragedy? It felt impossible, yet the seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout poisonous roots. My composure must have slipped because Dante's hand found my back, a steadying, proprietary weight. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his eyes scanning the room for threats. I could only nod, my throat tight. I felt a new pair of eyes on me and looked up to meet Marco's gaze from across the room. He was watching me, a slight frown creasing his brow, as if sensing my sudden shift. Did he know? Was the waiter his man or Gallo's? The meeting ended in a stalemate, a tense truce declared but not believed. As we were leaving, I excused myself to the restroom, my mind racing. The waiter's words, Gallo's threat, the business card. It was all a tangled web and I was caught in the center. The restroom was opulent and empty. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to clear my head. As I was reaching for a towel, I saw it. Tucked discreetly behind the silver soap dish was a small, folded piece of paper. Not for me, surely. But a frantic, desperate instinct told me otherwise. My fingers trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a copy of a police report. An old one. The report from my father's death. But this was a version I had never seen. It contained details that had been redacted from the official file. An addendum from a responding officer mentioned a witness who saw someone fleeing the scene just before the car exploded. The witness description was brief: tall, dark hair, wearing a distinctive leather jacket with a silver wolf's head embroidered on the back. My breath caught in my chest. I had seen that jacket. I had seen it just last week, draped over the back of a chair in Marco Russo's bedroom. The proof. Hidden here for me to find. A secret message in a public place. It was a declaration of war, and I was the battlefield. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, but the woman looking back was a stranger, her eyes wide with a terrifying, fractured knowledge. The charming brother, the reckless one, the one I had felt a dangerous pull towards, might be the architect of my entire life's pain. Chapter 7. The police report felt like a shard of ice lodged against my heart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words, distinctive leather jacket with a silver wolf's head, and the image of that exact jacket in Marco's room. The knowledge was a poison, seeping into every interaction, tainting every glance. I was living in a house of secrets, and I now held the most volatile one of all. My days became a tightrope walk of deception. I had to know more. I had to find a way to confirm this horrifying accusation without revealing my hand. My investigation was one of whispers and shadows, conducted in the stolen moments when Dante was consumed by business and Marco was out, attending to the family's more kinetic affairs. My first target was Alistair. The business card was a key, but to what lock? I found him in the greenhouse, tending to a collection of rare, poisonous orchids. It seemed fitting. Alistair, I began, my voice softer than I intended. My father, he thought highly of you. He didn't turn, his focus on snipping a dead leaf. Your father was a man of many opinions, Mrs. Russo. Most of them were wrong. He said you owed him. That made him pause. He set his shears down and finally turned to face me, his eyes as unreadable as ever. Debts in your father's world were not always financial. They were matters of confidence. Secrets kept. I held one for him. And now it seems that debt has been transferred to you. What secret? I pressed, my heart hammering. He knew he was a target, Alistair said, his voice a low, dry rustle. He made a deal with a rival to protect himself, but he was playing both sides. He asked me to secure a getaway for him, an escape route if things went south. I arranged a car. A clean vehicle, untraceable. The one he was supposed to take the night he died. But he didn't take it. I breathed. He took his own car. He was intercepted before he could get to it, Alistair confirmed. Someone knew his plan. Someone got to him first. He wouldn't say more. The debt was paid. But his words added another layer to the mystery. Someone knew my father was planning to run. Someone inside his circle. My next move was riskier. I needed to get into Marco's wing. The opportunity came when Dante was called away to an urgent meeting in the city, taking most of the security detail with him. I told Marco I had a headache and was retiring to my room for the evening. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. His wing was a reflection of him, chaotic, masculine, and unapologetically luxurious. Clothes were strewn over a chair, a half-empty bottle of expensive whiskey sat on a table, and the air smelled of him, that intoxicating and now terrifying scent of leather and charm. My hands shook as I searched. I felt like a trespasser, a betrayer. Part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I was letting an anonymous message turn me against a man who, for all his faults, had shown me moments of kindness. But the image of my father's burning car was stronger. I found the jacket in the back of his walk-in closet. My fingers trembled as I reached out and touched the soft leather. There it was, the silver wolf's head, its threadbare eyes seeming to mock me. It was real. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt a confusing mix of triumph and devastating heartbreak. I had been right to suspect him. I was also standing in the room of a man I was deeply, dangerously attracted to, holding proof that he may have destroyed my life. And then, a moment that shattered my certainty. Tucked into the inside pocket of the jacket was a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of a young Marco and an even younger boy who looked just like him, laughing on a tire swing. They had the same reckless smile, the same dark, messy hair. On the back, an inscription, "Me and Leo." Before it all went wrong, the name hit me like a physical blow. Leonardo Russo, their younger brother. I remembered his name from the family history book Dante had given me. He had died in a gang-related shooting years ago, a tragedy that was cited as the event that forever hardened the Russo family. Marco had been there when it happened. My investigation had just become infinitely more complicated. The jacket wasn't just a clue, it was a memory, tied to a trauma that defined him. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear him return. Looking for something, Principessa? I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Marco was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his charming smile gone. His eyes were dark, questioning. He had caught me. I held up the jacket, my hand shaking. A witness saw this jacket the night my father died. His expression shifted, from suspicion to a flicker of something I couldn't read. Pain, surprise, maybe even guilt. He didn't deny it. He just stared at the jacket, then at me. "Sometimes," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "things are not what they seem." He took a step into the room and I took a step back. The trust between us, already fractured, now lay in ruins. And yet, the photograph in the pocket complicated everything. He was a potential murderer who was also a grieving brother. The tension was broken by the sharp ring of my phone.
It was Dante.
His voice was clipped, urgent. "There's been another development. Alistair is missing." My blood went cold. Alistair, the man who knew my father's secrets, was gone. "And we found something in his quarters," Dante continued. "Financial records. Large, untraceable payments made to an offshore account. An account linked to Lorenzo Gallo. It was the perfect frame. Alistair, the trusted employee with a secret debt to my father, now looked like a traitor bought and paid for by their greatest enemy. But that's not all," Dante said, his voice dropping. "We found something else. Evidence that the car bomb that killed your father, the materials were sourced from a Russo family warehouse. One that Marco oversees." I looked at Marco, who was still watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. The phone felt like a lead weight in my hand. Dante had found proof that implicated Alistair, the man who held my father's secrets. But he had also found proof that pointed directly at Marco, the man whose jacket was at the scene of the crime. I was standing in a room with the man who might be my father's killer, holding evidence that could destroy him, while his brother, his rival, was on the phone, giving me a different version of the truth. I had discovered proof, but it was a tangled, contradictory mess. It wasn't a straight line to a killer, it was a web of lies and half-truths, and every thread seemed designed to condemn a different man. And I was the one who had to decide which thread to pull. Chapter 8. The world had tilted on its axis. Alistair was missing, presumed a traitor. Evidence pointed to Marco, who stood before me, his face an unreadable mask. And Dante was on the phone, his voice a cold stream of logic and suspicion, feeding me facts that felt like carefully crafted weapons. I was no longer an investigator. I was the epicenter of a war, and the battle lines were being drawn through me. "Stay where you are," Dante commanded through the phone. "I'm on my way back." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. I was trapped in a room with the man his evidence condemned. "So," Marco said, his voice deceptively calm, "what did my dear brother have to say? Has he found a way to hang me for this yet?" "He found evidence," I whispered. "The bomb materials, they came from a warehouse you manage." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped his lips. "Of course he did. Convenient. Gallo attacks, and suddenly evidence appears that not only implicates our most trusted advisor, but also his reckless, problematic brother. Dante loves a clean narrative." He took another step closer, and this time I held my ground. "A witness saw your jacket. Did they?" he asked softly. "Or did someone tell them they saw it?" He gestured to the jacket in my hands. "I haven't worn that thing in 10 years. Not since the night my brother Leo died in my arms while I was wearing it." It's a ghost I keep in my closet. A reminder. His words were a punch to the gut. The photo in the pocket. The pain I'd seen in his eyes. It couldn't be a lie. The grief was too real. Someone is playing a very, very smart game, Alara, Marco said, his gaze intense, searching. They're not just trying to start a war between us and the gallows. They're starting a war inside this house. Between me and Dante. And they're using you and your father's memory as the spark. My head was spinning. Dante's cold logic versus Marco's passionate, wounded defense. Both felt true. Both could be lies. Suddenly, a different phone buzzed. Not mine, not Marco's. It was a burner phone, tucked between the cushions of the sofa. Marco's eyes narrowed. He picked it up, answered, and put it on speaker. Well, the grieving daughter. It was Lorenzo Gallo's voice, slick with venom. Have you figured it out yet? Have you realized the man you're sharing a roof with is the same one who orphaned you? What do you want, Gallo? Marco snarled. I want to offer the girl a choice, Gallo replied smoothly. I have Alistair. He's been very talkative. He confirms everything. Marco Russo wanted your father out of the way. A loose end from a deal gone bad. Alistair helped him set it up.
A lie.
Alistair had told me he'd arranged an escape for my father. Gallo was twisting it. Dante knows, Gallo continued, his voice a poisonous caress. He's known for years. He buried it to protect the family name. He's just as guilty. They're both using you. But I can give you justice, Alara. Help me destroy them. Testify to what you found. I can protect you. Give you a life free of them. It was a trap. A blatant attempt to use me to tear the Russo empire apart. Go to hell, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Gallo chuckled. Wrong answer. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. Now, I'll have to provide a more compelling demonstration of the truth. The line went dead. A new, immediate dread washed over me. A demonstration. Before we could process the threat, the house alarm blared, a piercing, frantic scream. Marco's head snapped up. His phone rang again. This time it was his own. He answered, his face paling. What do you mean, she's gone? He roared into the phone. He listened, his body going rigid. Where? He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new, terrifying urgency. It's Maya, I breathed, a cold hand squeezing my heart. They took her, Marco said, his voice raw with fury. Gallo's men. They walked right into the recovery clinic. They took her from her bed. The world fell away. My sister. The reason for this entire nightmare. Gallo had her. He was using her to force my hand, to make me choose. Just then, Dante burst into the room, gun drawn, his face a mask of cold fury. What the hell is going on? Gallo has Maya, Marco said, the rivalry between them evaporating in the face of a shared, catastrophic failure. They had promised to protect my family. They had failed. Dante's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something beyond anger or suspicion. I saw regret. He had been so focused on the enemy within that he'd left the most vulnerable person in my life exposed.
His phone rang.
It was Gallo. Dante answered, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. Let her go. Not a chance, Russo. Gallo's voice crackled through the speaker. You want a girl back? Your wife makes a choice. Right here, right now. Who does she believe? The brother with the evidence, or the brother with the alibi? Who is the real poison in your family? Tell me, Alara. Who killed your father? I was standing between the two brothers, the weight of Gallo's impossible ultimatum crushing me. Outside, my sister was in the hands of a monster. Inside, I was trapped with two men, one of whom might be another kind of monster entirely. My choice wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about Maya's future. I looked at Dante, the cold strategist, his face tight with controlled rage, his logic pointing to Marco's guilt. I looked at Marco, the reckless charmer, his eyes filled with a desperate, wounded sincerity, pleading with me to see the truth he claimed was real. Gallo wanted me to choose, to shatter their family from within. But in that moment, staring at the two of them, a new, Terrifying thought emerged. What if they were both telling the truth? What if they were both lying? What if the real killer was someone else entirely, a hidden player moving them all like pawns on a board? My choice would either save Maya or condemn her. I had to choose who to believe, who to align with in this single, critical moment. The air was thick with tension, with the unspoken history of brotherhood and betrayal. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a step closer to an irrevocable decision. And as I opened my mouth to speak, the front doors of the estate exploded inwards, the boom shaking the very foundations of the house. Gallo wasn't waiting for an answer. His demonstration had arrived.
Chapter 9.
The explosion ripped through the mansion's facade, a deafening roar that sent a shockwave of dust and debris billowing down the hall. The world dissolved into chaos. Shouts and gunfire erupted from downstairs as Gallo's men stormed the estate. The war had come home. There was no more time for choices or accusations. Instinct took over. In a movement so fast I barely registered it, Dante grabbed me, shoving me behind him as Marco moved to flank the doorway, his own weapon drawn. The rivalry that had defined them vanished, replaced by the seamless, lethal teamwork of two predators defending their territory. "Get her to the panic room," Dante yelled over the din of battle. "The hell I will," Marco shot back. "We're not splitting up. That's how they win." They were right. We were trapped on the second floor, Gallo's men swarming below. Downstairs, the sounds of fighting were brutal and close. The Russo guards were loyal, but they were outnumbered. "Gallo doesn't want us dead," Dante said, his mind already working, calculating. "He wants her." He looked at me, his eyes flinty. "He wants a witness, a tool to dismantle us publicly. They won't use lethal force on you if they can help it." "A comforting thought," I muttered, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. A new sound emerged from the chaos, a rhythmic, heavy thudding against the west wall of the house. "They're coming through the wall," Marco growled. "They're trying to bypass the foyer." We were being cornered. Dante's gaze swept the room, landing on a heavy tapestry depicting an ancient Russo battle. "Behind there, service corridor. It leads to the kitchens. Then the tunnels." He pulled the tapestry aside, revealing a narrow, dark opening I never knew existed. The house was riddled with secrets. Marco went first, his gun leading the way. Dante pushed me in after him, his hand firm on my back, before following and pulling the tapestry shut. The corridor was tight and smelled of dust and damp stone. We moved quickly, the sounds of the assault muffled, but still terrifyingly present. As we descended a narrow staircase, a voice echoed from a vent above us. It was Alistair. "He's a fool, Gallo." Alistair's voice was strained, filled with pain. "You think you can control them? You're unleashing a storm you can't survive." "You should have thought of that before you took my money," Gallo's voice replied, cold and smug. "They were in the study, directly above us." "The money was for information," Alistair gasped. "About your rivals. Not about the girl's father. That was never part of our deal." My blood ran cold. Dante and Marco froze, listening. "Your deal was to do what I paid you for," Gallo sneered. "You were my inside man. You planted the evidence in Marco's warehouse. You made the anonymous tips. A brilliant performance. A shame no one will be left to applaud." A single, sharp gunshot echoed through the vent, followed by a heavy thud. I stifled a scream, pressing my hand to my mouth. Alistair. He wasn't the mole, he was a pawn, just like me. Gallo had used him to plant the evidence against Marco, to orchestrate this entire war between the brothers. Marco's face was a mask of thunderous fury. Dante's was worse. It was a canvas of cold, dawning comprehension. He had been played. His logic, his suspicion, his calculated moves, all of it had been manipulated by Gallo. He looked at Marco, and in that shared, silent glance, a decade of mistrust seemed to fracture. But Gallo wasn't finished. His voice, now talking to someone on a radio, drifted down again. "No, the car bomb wasn't my work. That was a gift from an old friend of the family. A bit of poetic justice. I just used the fallout. Find the girl. And bring me the brothers. Alive. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Gallo hadn't killed my father. He had simply exploited his death. He had used the existing tragedy to frame Marco and sow chaos. The real killer, the one who had set this entire chain of events in motion years ago, was still out there. A hidden manipulator. An old friend of the family. We reached the kitchens. The sounds of fighting were louder here. We could hear the guards holding the line at the main entrance to the service wing. "The tunnels are our only chance," Dante said, his voice grim. He led us to a massive stone hearth, pressing a loose brick. A section of the floor ground open, revealing a dark, descending staircase. As we started down, Marco grabbed my arm, his eyes boring into mine. "Elara, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with your father's death." "I know," I whispered, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was heartbreaking. We were in the tunnels, a network of damp, echoing passages beneath the estate, when we heard them. Gallo's men were behind us. They had breached the kitchen. We ran. The air was cold and thin, and my lungs burned. Dante led the way, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels with an assuredness that spoke of a childhood spent exploring them. Marco brought up the rear, turning occasionally to fire back at our pursuers. The emotional fallout of the past hour was a storm raging inside me. The truth, or at least a clear version of it, was out. Marco was innocent of my father's murder. Dante had been wrong, manipulated by an enemy who understood his own cold logic better than he did. And Alistair was dead, a victim in a game he thought he could control. We burst out of a hidden door into the woods at the far edge of the estate. The mansion was still lit up, the sounds of battle echoing in the distance. We were free, but we had lost everything. The fortress had fallen. Our home was overrun. And Maya was still in Gallo's hands. I stumbled, my legs giving out, my emotions finally overwhelming me. I sank to the damp earth, the reality of our situation crashing down. We had the truth, but what good was it? Dante and Marco stopped, turning to me. The animosity was gone, replaced by a shared, grim purpose. Dante knelt in front of me, his usual coldness replaced by a raw intensity. "We will get her back. I give you my word." Marco stood beside him, a silent, solid promise. I looked at their faces, streaked with grime and sweat, illuminated by the distant chaos. The cold strategist and the reckless charmer. The two men who had turned my life upside down. I had entered their world as a pawn, a contract. But somewhere along the way, in the fire and the fear, something had changed. I wasn't just a part of their game anymore. They were part of my life. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It wasn't a question. It was a decision. I wouldn't run and hide while my sister was in danger. I wouldn't abandon the two men who, despite everything, had fought to protect me. "I'm not running. We fight. We get her back. Together." Dante's eyes searched mine, and he seemed to find the answer he was looking for. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, of acceptance. I was staying, not because the contract demanded it, but because my heart did. The war wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. And I was no longer on the sidelines.
I was on the front line. Chapter 10.
The forest floor was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the fire and chaos we'd left behind at the estate. We were fugitives on our own land, stripped of our fortress, our guards, our power. All we had was the grim truth and a shared, burning purpose. Get Maya back. Gallo had made his move, but he had miscalculated. He thought revealing the truth would shatter us, turn me against them and them against each other. Instead, he had forged us into something new. A weapon. The rivalry between Dante and Marco had been cauterized by the shared threat, their animosity burned away to reveal a foundation of grudging, brotherly loyalty. "He'll have taken her to one of his warehouses on the docks," Dante said, his voice a low growl. The strategist was already re-emerging from the emotional wreckage, his mind piecing together a plan. It's isolated, easily defended, and offers multiple escape routes by water. It'll be a fortress, Marco added, reloading his weapon with swift, economical movements. The charmer was gone, replaced entirely by the enforcer. He'll have his entire crew there, waiting for us. He'll be expecting an army, Dante countered, a flicker of cold fire in his eyes. He won't be expecting just the three of us. The three of us? I asked, my voice trembling but resolute. You can't mean… Gallo wants me, Alara, Dante said, turning to me. His gaze was intense, holding mine. He wants to parade me, broken, in front of the other families.
He needs me alive.
That's our leverage. And he wants me as the witness to seal the deal, I added, understanding dawning. The grieving wife who brought down the mighty Russo family. Exactly, Marco said, his expression grim. Which means the two of you are the bait. And I'm the trap. The plan was insane. It was suicide. It was also the only chance we had. They would offer a trade, themselves for Maya. They would walk into the lion's den, counting on Gallo's arrogance and greed to make him accept. My role was to be the prize, the reason for their surrender. And Marco? Marco would be the ghost in the machine, the unseen force that would bring the entire operation crashing down around Gallo's ears. They made the call from a burner phone, Dante's voice a carefully calibrated mix of defeat and desperation. He offered Gallo everything, a full surrender, a public abdication of power. All in exchange for Maya's safe return and my protection under Gallo's new regime. As predicted, Gallo's ego couldn't resist. He agreed, naming a time and a place. Warehouse 12, Pier 4 at midnight. The hours leading up to midnight were the longest of my life. We found refuge in a small, forgotten safe house on the outskirts of the city, a place so old it had belonged to their father. It was there that Marco, while cleaning his weapons, finally spoke of the jacket. My father gave it to me, he said, his voice quiet, distant. A week before Leo died. It was the last thing I had from him that wasn't tainted. After Leo was killed, I couldn't look at it. I put it away. Gallo must have known the story. He must have had someone replicate it for his witness. It was a piece of the puzzle, a confirmation of the depth of Gallo's manipulation. He hadn't just framed Marco, he had used the most painful memory of his life to do it. As the hour approached, Dante turned to me. The mask of the cold strategist was firmly in place, but his eyes held a flicker of something else, something raw and uncertain. This will be dangerous, Alara. Once we are inside, you will be on your own until Marco makes his move. You must be strong. I learned from the best, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before his fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch was featherlight, yet it sent a shockwave through me. When this is over, he began, then stopped, as if the words were an unfamiliar currency. He simply nodded, the unspoken promise hanging in the air between us. We arrived at the docks under the cloak of a moonless sky. The air smelled of salt and decay. Warehouse 12 loomed before us, a metal behemoth. As planned, Marco slipped away into the shadows, a phantom armed with vengeance. Dante and I walked toward the single, illuminated door, our hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The inside of the warehouse was a vast, cavernous space, filled with crates and the shadows of machinery. Gallo stood in the center, flanked by a dozen of his men. And in a chair, bound but blessedly unharmed, was Maya. Her eyes widened when she saw me, a mix of terror and relief. Alara. Let her go, Gallo, Dante said, his voice echoing in the vast space. We're here. You've won. Gallo laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound.
Won?
Oh, Russo, this isn't about winning. This is about annihilation. He gestured to me. Bring her here. 2 of his men grabbed me, pulling me toward him. I locked eyes with Maya, trying to convey a reassurance I didn't feel. It's okay. Stay calm. Dante watched, his face a stony mask, as Gallo's men forced him to his knees. The great Dante Russo, humbled. It was the exact image Gallo wanted to cement his new reign. You see, Alara? Gallo said, his hand gripping my chin, forcing me to look at him. This is true power. Not in a contract, but in breaking your enemies completely. It was then that the lights went out. The warehouse was plunged into absolute, disorienting darkness. A single gunshot rang out from the rafters, and one of Gallo's men screamed. Panic erupted. Shouts, confusion, more gunshots, this time from a different direction. Marco. In the chaos, Dante moved. He surged to his feet, breaking the arm of the man closest to him with a sickening crack. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, using the darkness as his ally. Someone grabbed me, and I screamed, lashing out. It's me. Dante's voice was in my ear. He shoved a gun into my hand. Get to Maya. Shoot anyone who isn't me or Marco. He pushed me in her direction and then disappeared back into the fray. The warehouse was a symphony of destruction. Muzzle flashes illuminated brief, brutal tableaus. Marco, appearing from behind a stack of crates, a blur of deadly efficiency. Dante moving through the chaos like a ghost, his attacks precise and devastating. They were fighting back to back, a seamless unit, their years of rivalry transformed into a perfect, deadly dance. I scrambled toward Maya, my heart pounding. A figure loomed out of the darkness in front of me. I raised the gun, my hands shaking, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into my shoulder as the man fell. I didn't have time to feel remorse. I cut Maya's ropes with a knife from the fallen guard's belt. We have to go, I yelled, pulling her to her feet. The main power suddenly kicked back on, flooding the warehouse with harsh, fluorescent light. The scene was one of carnage. Most of Gallo's men were down, but Gallo himself was still standing, and he had his gun trained on the one target no one was watching. He fired. Not at Dante, not at Marco. At me. No. Marco screamed, launching himself in front of me. The bullet slammed into his shoulder, spinning him around. He crumpled to the ground, a pained gasp escaping his lips. Seeing his brother fall, Dante let out a roar of pure fury. He charged Gallo, a primal force of vengeance. The fight was short, brutal, and ended with Gallo on the ground, Dante's hands around his throat. I rushed to Marco's side, pressing my hands against the wound, my mind numb with shock and terror. He had taken a bullet for me. The reckless charmer, the man I had suspected and feared, had shielded me with his own body without a second's hesitation. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. Dante stood over Gallo's gasping form, his chest heaving. He looked from his defeated enemy to his wounded brother, then to me, huddled on the ground, covered in Marco's blood. They had done it. They had worked together, risked everything, and saved us. But as I looked at Marco, pale and bleeding, and at Dante, his face a mask of cold fury and dawning horror, I knew that the battle was over, but the war for our future was anything but. We were united, but our feelings, tangled in a web of violence, sacrifice, and a contract signed in desperation, were dangerously, painfully unresolved. Chapter 11. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance painted the grimy warehouse walls in strokes of urgent, pulsating color. The air, thick with the metallic scent of blood and gunpowder, felt thin in my lungs. I watched, numb, as paramedics loaded a conscious but pale Marco onto a stretcher. His eyes found mine before they wheeled him out, and he gave me a weak, pained smile, a flash of the reckless charmer beneath the wounded soldier. Dante handled the aftermath with chilling efficiency. He presented the police with a clean, simple narrative. A rival businessman, Lorenzo Gallo, had kidnapped my sister and orchestrated a violent confrontation. The evidence of the attack, the dozen armed men, and Gallo's own confession, which Dante had persuaded him to give before the police arrived, was irrefutable. The deeper, messier truths about my father, Alistair, and the internal manipulations were buried, Russo family secrets swept back under the rug. Maya was safe, whisked away by a private security team to a new, more secure hospital. And I was back at the estate, which was no longer a home but a crime scene being scrubbed clean. The silence that fell after the chaos was heavier, more profound than before. We had won, but the victory felt hollow, fragile. The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding, both literally and figuratively. Carpenters and glaziers repaired the physical damage to the mansion, while the three of us navigated the wreckage of our relationships. Marco returned from the hospital with his arm in a sling, his usual restless energy replaced by a quiet, watchful intensity. The bullet he took for me was a physical, undeniable thing between us, a debt I could never repay. Dante retreated back into himself, the cold strategist taking over once more, but something had fundamentally shifted. The suspicion in his eyes when he looked at me was gone, replaced by a complex, unsettling mix of possession, respect, and something that looked dangerously like emotion. Trust was not a switch that could be flipped. It had to be earned, rebuilt piece by painful piece. I was the one who set the new terms. The contract had been fulfilled. Maya was safe. Technically, I was free to go. But leaving felt like an amputation. I had been forged in their fire, and a part of me now belonged in this dark, dangerous world. "I'm staying," I announced one evening. We were in the study, the first time we'd all been in the room together since the night of the attack. "But not as your possession." I looked directly at Dante. "And not as your plaything." My gaze shifted to Marco. "The contract is void. If I stay, it's on my terms." Marco leaned back on the leather sofa, his good arm resting along the back. "And what are your terms, Principessa?" "No more secrets," I said, my voice steady. "About anything. My father, your family, your business. If I am to be a part of this life, I will not be a blind partner." Dante stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed. For a long moment, he was silent, his face unreadable. I thought he would refuse, that his need for control would outweigh anything else. "Agreed," he said finally, his voice quiet. The single word held more weight than 1,000 promises. It was a concession, an admission that the old rules no longer applied. The dynamic between us began to change. The rigid lines of captor and captive, of rival brothers, began to blur. Dante started sharing details of his work, asking for my opinion on minor business dealings, treating me not as an asset but as a confidant. In these moments, I saw the brilliant, lonely man behind the ruthless facade, and the respect I felt for him deepened into something more complicated. Marco, in turn, stopped his provocative teasing. His charm became softer, his presence a source of comfort rather than chaos. We would spend hours in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. He told me more about Leo, about the guilt he carried, and I saw the profound well of pain he hid beneath his easy smile. The bullet wound was a constant reminder of his sacrifice, and the gratitude I felt was tangled up with a fierce, protective affection. The attraction I felt for both of them intensified, no longer a confusing byproduct of fear and danger, but a genuine emotional connection. It was a terrifying, impossible situation. The quiet intensity of Dante, who made me feel safe and seen. The wounded warmth of Marco, who made me feel cherished and alive. My heart was a battleground, torn between two opposing, equally powerful forces. One rainy afternoon, I found Dante in the library, staring at the portrait of his parents. "I misjudged you," he said, not looking at me. "I saw you as a variable to be controlled. I didn't see your strength." He finally turned, his steel eyes holding a raw emotion that stole my breath. "Gallo was right about one thing. Bringing you here was a mistake. It exposed us, made us vulnerable. But it was also the only thing that saved us." He stepped closer, the space between us charged with unspoken words. "I don't want to control you anymore, Elara. I just want you." Later that same day, Marco found me on the balcony overlooking the storm-swept gardens. He stood beside me, his good shoulder brushing mine. "He's falling for you, you know," he said quietly. "Marco." "It's okay," he said, a sad smile touching his lips. "How could he not? But I need you to know when I stepped in front of that bullet, it wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. Protecting you is as natural as breathing to me now." He looked at me, his whiskey-brown eyes full of a deep, aching sincerity. I know this is a mess. I know we don't deserve you. But a life without you in it? I don't want to imagine it. The emotional intimacy with each of them was deepening, becoming more real and more painful every day. There was no easy answer, no neat ending. I was standing on a precipice, with two very different, equally compelling worlds pulling at me. Rebuilding trust was one thing, but navigating the treacherous landscape of my own heart was a far more dangerous challenge. The peace we had found was real, but it was fragile, and the unresolved question of the three of us, was a storm cloud that threatened to break at any moment. Chapter 12. The seasons began to turn, the crisp chill of autumn bleeding into the cold, sharp bite of winter. The Russo estate, once a gilded cage, had become something else. A sanctuary, a battleground,
A home.
the peace we'd settled into was a living, breathing thing, fragile and laced with the constant, low hum of danger from the world outside our walls. But the most dangerous battle was the one being waged within them. I had stayed. I had stayed on my own terms, and, to my surprise, they had honored them. The secrets that once formed the foundation of the house had been exorcised, replaced by a raw, brutal honesty. I learned the grim details of their business, the alliances, and the rivalries. I sat in on meetings, my voice, at first tentative, growing stronger, more confident. I was no longer a pawn. I was a player, a queen of a broken, dangerous kingdom. My relationship with the brothers remained a treacherous, uncharted territory. The love I felt for them was not a simple choice between two paths. It was a tangled, complicated knot. My heart, impossibly, had made room for both. With Dante, I found a meeting of minds. We spent long nights in his study, debating strategy, history, philosophy. He treated me as his equal, his intellectual partner. His respect was a powerful aphrodisiac. In his presence, I felt sharp, powerful, seen. The passion between us was a slow burn, an undercurrent of intense, unspoken longing that crackled in the space between us. A touch of his hand, a lingering gaze across a room, it was a language of restraint and control that was maddeningly seductive. He was my anchor, the calm center of my chaotic world. With Marco, I found a healing of the soul. He taught me to laugh again. He would pull me from the stuffy confines of the study and drag me out into the gardens, even in the snow. He was the keeper of my lighter moments, the one who reminded me that even in a world of shadows, there could be light. The passion with him was different, warm, impulsive, and fiercely protective. It was in the way he'd wrap a blanket around my shoulders, the way his eyes would soften when I smiled, the constant, gentle touch of his hand on my back. He was my warmth, the fire that kept the cold at bay. They knew. Of course, they knew. They saw the way I looked at the other, the way my allegiance shifted moment to moment. The rivalry between them hadn't vanished. It had simply changed form. It was no longer a battle for power over the family, but a quiet, desperate battle for my heart. It was in the subtle competition for my time, the jealousy that flickered in Dante's eyes when I laughed at one of Marco's jokes, the sadness that touched Marco's smile when he saw me locked in a deep conversation with Dante. They never forced me to choose. It was a silent, agonizing stalemate. We were three broken people, bound by a contract, by violence, and now by a strange, unconventional love that none of us knew how to navigate. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in my own wing, a territory I had reclaimed, and feel the pull of them both, two different magnets drawing me in opposite directions. The intimacy between us was deep and emotional, but the physical line had not been crossed again. It was a line that, once crossed with one, might mean losing the other forever. One cold December evening, Dante found me in the library, staring into the fireplace. "This cannot continue, Alara," he said, his voice low. "This a limbo. It is not fair to you." "And what is the solution?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A choice? How can I choose? To choose one is to lose the other. To lose either of you feels like losing a part of myself. Then perhaps the choice is not the one we have been considering, he said, his gaze intense. Before he could continue, Marco entered the room, his arm now free of the sling but a faint stiffness still in his movements. He saw the tension between us, the gravity of the conversation. Don't, Marco said to Dante, his voice quiet but firm. Don't put that weight on her. This is our problem to solve. He looked at me, his eyes full of a familiar, aching warmth. We brought you into this world, Elara. Both of us. We have no right to make you tear your own heart in two to fix it. We stood there, the three of us caught in our impossible, painful triangle. The love was real. The stalemate was real. The passion and the mistrust, the loyalty and the rivalry. It all coexisted in a delicate, dangerous balance. I had decided to stay. I had made a place for myself in this world of monsters and mansions. I had done it on my terms. But what those terms would ultimately mean for the three of us was a question that still had no answer. As we stood in the firelight, the silence pregnant with unspoken feelings, Dante's secure phone rang, shrill and unwelcome. He answered it, his face shifting from that of a conflicted lover to the cold mafia lord in an instant. What is it? He listened, his body going still. Who? A pause. Are you certain? He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and a new, cold dread washed over me. It was a look I recognized. It was the look he'd had when he learned of Gallo's first attack. He ended the call, his face a grim mask. What's wrong? I asked, my heart beginning to pound. That was a source in Europe, Dante said, his voice hard as iron. He has information about my father's death. He says Gallo wasn't the only one who used it to his advantage. What are you talking about? Marco demanded. Dante's gaze was fixed on me, and what I saw in his eyes made the blood in my veins turn to ice. It was a dawning, horrific suspicion, dredged up from the past we thought we had buried. The informant says the order for the hit on your father, the one that started everything, it didn't come from a rival family. He paused, the words dropping into the silent room like stones. It was signed by a woman. He says the evidence suggests she was your father's mistress. A woman named Isabella Rossi. My mother's name,